All right, we're going to get started. Hello, everyone. How's everybody's day been? Good. My name is James Britt. I'm Director of Public Engagement here at ICA. I want to welcome you to the hashtag Blkgrlswurld Punk Fest. Thank you, yeah. This is different for us. We've never done anything like this before. It's a partnership with two sisters, and you'll meet one of them. She's going to be the moderator. That's Courtney Long here, and Christina Long in the back. And I'll let them talk more about hashtag Blkgrlswurld. I want to bring to your attention that we're going to have a zine fair and concerts tomorrow starting at 11:30. We kick it off with a workshop. All that information is in the programs that are in your chairs, or you can check on our website as well. And then please come back and view our exhibitions, Colored People Time Banal Presents, Michelle Lopez's Ballast and Barricades, and then the Fierce Pussy exhibition, which is what inspired this project to begin with. I also want to give a special shout out to the Sachs Foundation. They funded this project. They gave us a lot of grant money, so appreciative of them. And then thanks to ICA staff, but specifically Derek Rigby, our audio tech, and also Tusif Noor, who is our Spiegel-Wilkes Curatorial Fellow. Tusif has been instrumental in putting this event together. So thank you to all of them, and then I'm gonna turn it over to Courtney. So thank you.
All right, thank you, James, for that introduction. Hi, everybody. Good evening, good evening. My name is Courtney Long, and I am the senior editor for hashtag Blkgrlswurld Zine. I am so happy to have you all here tonight at the very first ever Blkgrlswurld Punks of Color panel talk. This is so cool. Thank you so much for coming. I would also like to thank the ICA for partnering with us so that we can offer this panel. The goal of this panel is to bring together 6 individuals who are activists, organizers, documentarians, and creators who are either active within the underground music scene or are exhibiting classic punk ideology such as individual freedom and self-expression. Tonight, there will be 1 to 3 individual questions for each panelist and group discussion questions so that we can capture the vastly different perspectives of the group. We will dig deep into their passions and conclude with a discussion on how we can encourage others and inspire the community to continue in their footsteps. Then we'll open it for a Q&A. So let's get started. Can everyone say their name and then their personal project? Oh,
hi, my name is Chris L. Terry. I'm the author of the book Black Card.
All right, thank you.
I'm Scout Cartagena, and I run Break Free Fest here.
Hey, what's going on? I'm Wilbert L. Cooper, and I'm a journalist and documentarian.
My name is Laina Dawes. I'm the author of What Are You Doing Here? A Black Woman's Life in Liberation and Heavy Metal, and I'm currently at Columbia as a PhD student.
My name is Von Phoenix, and I'm the CEO of Punk Black.
Hi everyone, my name is Ola, and I'm an interdisciplinary artist, a mom, a set decorator, yoga teacher, and also the creator of a project called the Free Black Women's Library.
All right, thanks you guys for being guests for this panel. So to start everybody out, I'm just gonna talk about a personal experience. My first introduction to alternative non-mainstream music was by stealing my sister's CD player. Keeping an eye on the door, I crept under her desk where she couldn't see me and feverishly listened to a heavy metal band that had parental advisory across the cover. This was crazy. Can each of you tell me, what was your first experience listening to alternative music or bands, and how did you like it? Or what is your favorite band? Let's start with Chris.
Sure. I got into skateboarding in 7th grade when I was 12, and I had my first experience where I ticked off a geek who knew more about music than I did. I went to my friend Matt's house, and he had Fugazi tape, and he had a Nirvana tape, and he's like, "Have you heard Fugazi?" And I said, "Is that the Smells Like Teen Spirit band?" And he almost kicked me out of there. Yeah. But somehow I kept coming back.
Awesome.
Yeah. My first experience was my dad was always like trying to push the Beatles and the Zombies on me.
And then one day I went to a local public library, and I was just like scamming through the CDs, and I was like, I'm just gonna grab this one and this one, and they were System of a Down, and and I literally played Dear Dance repeatedly, and my mom hated it. And then I also played The Cure's self-titled album, and then that led me to like Rites of Spring and Fugazi, and I was just like, I am so sad, but also I really need to borrow my mom's like black eyeliner, and it was super corny at first.
Oh no!
I even did like a fake belly button ring at one point. It was a nightmare.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, when I was in elementary school, I did some bad things in the early part of the summer, and I was basically grounded all summer long. So I had to kind of just amuse myself and figure out what I was going to do because I couldn't go outside. And my dad has a very extensive record collection. He's like an old black rocker, and of course he has the mainstream stuff like the Beatles and stuff. But then there's every now and again little obscure records that he would have, like Brian Eno or The Clash, and that was kind of how I first started to dip into alternative punk rock and heavy metal.
Awesome.
Kiss was my gateway at 8 years old. I don't know, I guess probably a lot of you are too young to remember, but there was this really cheesy made-for-TV movie called Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. And so just the imagery and the makeup and everything got me, I was intrigued by the band. For my 8th birthday, I asked for and got Kiss Dynasty. And since then, that was my gateway into the new wave of British heavy metal. So from there it was Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and just a ton of others. So yeah.
Nice.
Actually, I started out in rock music through J-Rock. I started out with Larkin Cell through Bento Beatbox, Gazette, a lot of those bands around that time. Even Nami Tamaki, who was like going between pop music and rock music, I was still learning all the dance moves that she was doing at that time. But that's how I got into music.
Nice.
I think for me, it's hard for me to say where it started. Maybe David Bowie, and just being really intrigued and drawn into the androgyny, the sci-fi kind of makeup, costuming, and all that. I think the visual aesthetics of the music is what pulled me in first. And then I kind of got caught up into the music, and that sent me down a rabbit hole. And also dressing in that same way, or in a way that was like similar, kind of like oddball, like attracted certain people in school. So we just kind of became a posse and shared music with each other and listened to music together and cut school and went and stole music from like Tower Records, went and stole CDs, and like, I think that's what started it.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, thanks you guys. My next question for everybody is, for me, punk is rebellion. It's anti-authoritarianism, it's wild, it's independent record labels, it's shouted lyrics, liberation, and empathy. What does punk or self-expression mean to you and why? Let's start at the top.
Yeah, punk, I really got interested in punk, like do-it-yourself punk, at a time when I was starting to feel like it wasn't possible to succeed in other ways. My family was having a lot of money problems. We were moving around a lot. And I was like, this is something that feels accessible. This feels like something that I can do. And I can get some results and be proud of something. And so that was what really, really drew me in first. Yeah, and then also it was a way to find a community.
Find a community.
Transient.
Nice.
I grew up with like a Southern Baptist black mom, as many of you probably know, is an intense lifestyle. And I grew up with a super Puerto Rican Catholic father, who is a bit of a goofy guy. And we were moving around. My parents were Air Force military. They used the military to get out of actually like parts of like poverty. Like my dad always tells the story of we walked 35 miles with dirt and no shoes, and we ate plantains all the time. And I was just like, this sounds pretty cool. And like they used it to get out of a lifestyle that they both had, and it kind of created this like very household to make them proud, and a lot of pressure. And so when I started listening to punk and like hardcore, I got really into New York hardcore. It felt like it was just like the rules were just to be a community, the rules were just to be you, and the rules were to learn how to two-step and not bust your ass, which I still can't do. So I kind of like took that and went with it. It was where I had like my angry moments. You know, you can't yell at your mom. You feel like, damn you, Karen. You can't do shit like that, you know, and you're with the black mom. So I kind of was just like, that's where I got upset. It's true. That's where I got upset. That's where I kind of like snuck out. And I was like, you know, I felt like I like had this like liberation that those like white kids on TV were always like, hey, you gonna sneak out and like, I don't know, go to a punk show? I was like, whoa, Degrassi. So it kind of was like my moment to like feel like I was living that teenage TV lifestyle, but then I ended up finding a part of me that I didn't think I could express at home.
Okay.
Definitely. I think for me, punk is definitely freedom of expression. You know, I think when I really started to get attracted to the music, I was very, very angry, and I didn't really know why, and I didn't have words to articulate it. And so when I started to discover bands who were expressing that aggression, whether it was like Bad Brains or, you know, Fugazi, as you mentioned, I could really relate to it and put words to that feeling that I had inside and be able to put it out into the world. And when I actually started to play and perform music in high school and college, it was such a release to be able to express and speak into the world how I felt. And it was kind of a therapeutic thing to just get that energy and that feeling out into the world, and then to find out that other people are interested in and excited about it, and you're not alone, and there's a community there. I think super, super valuable.
Nice.
I grew up in rural Ontario, Canada, way out in the country, and even to this day, my parents still don't have cable. But I remember, I think that I think punk via my older sister who was into The Clash. I was more into hardcore. And there was this grainy, black and white TV show in the 80s called The New Music that came out of Toronto. And I think it came on at like 11:30 at night, and I would stay up and watch it. And that's where I learned about Agnostic Front, Black Flag, Madball, and some other kind of smaller New York hardcore scene bands. What attracted me was their anger, and that growing up as a transracial adoptee in the early 80s in rural Ontario, Canada, meant that I dealt with a lot of racism. And so I think that the lead singer of Agnostic Front, his whole chest is covered in tattoos, and he's got this like cross in the center of his chest. And I've always been kind of fascinated by that masculine power, because it was something that I didn't have that I really needed. And so that's why I'm more into hardcore than punk.
Okay.
I was never really good with dealing with my emotions growing up. It just wasn't really encouraged in our family. So when I got into rock music, it was sort of like a place for me to shove my emotions into. I actually really started playing guitar before I even really got into punk music at all. So when I discovered punk music, I was like, oh shit, I can like, you know, I can just strum some power chords and like really, really dig all this out. So that's kind of form of self-expression that's always been to me.
Okay.
A lot of anger on this stage. And I can relate to all of it. Yeah, for me, similar to what's already been said, is that emotion, that frustration, like being being a black person, living in capitalist, racist, heteronormative, patriarchal society, as Bell Hooks says, like we're dealing with a lot of, messaging, a lot of bias, a lot of prejudice, a lot of psychic violence, and it's hard to carry all of that, especially as a young person. We're all older now, and maybe we've found different paths, maybe not, but I feel like when you're a teenager, you're already dealing with your puberty, your hormones, having crushes, your parents being annoying. So I think that music, that raw passion that it gives you, it feels very nurturing. It feels very affirming, because it's like, oh, I'm not the only person that is dealing with these things. And when it comes to my own personal experience, like the more my parents hated it, the more I loved it.
Oh my
You know,
goodness.
I wore black all the time. Like, I didn't wear any other colors. You know, I wore my boots on the hottest days of the year. Like, it was just like, you're not gonna like this, you're gonna try to take this from me, I refuse. So I think that made me even more defiant. And I feel like when I think about punk, I think about defiance, and I think about rejecting the status quo. Because if you're actively choosing that as your path, that means you're making the choice to confront and deal with the outside world, looking at you up and down, making random comments, following you around the store, and you're like, I don't give a fuck, this is me. So I always, I'm an older person now, maybe one of the older people here, and when I see teenagers choosing to express themselves in that way, it makes me really happy. Because I feel like it's part of a long line of legacy of a microcosm of Blackness, because there are different ways that we define and choose to deal with what we're dealing with, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Thanks, you guys. It sounds like there's a lot of themes about community here, and that you guys were able to find community in punk music. So I know some of you touched on your families weren't really down with the punk music you were playing, but in general, was your community supportive to you as you began your personal project that you have today, or did you find that you had to actively seek out and create a community for yourself?
My parents were always supportive of me being creative. They're both kind of progressive hippie types, and I think pretty quickly they were like, we know you're not going to be a doctor or a lawyer. My mom's a librarian, my dad's a music lover, so the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. But I think, in terms of finding a community, punk kind of seemed like a quick fix in certain ways, but then I realized I didn't really feel like everything about myself was being nourished in the very white, male, straight punk scene in the South in the early 2000s. So that's when I started trying to find a broader community and also get the hell out of Virginia.
Oh boy.
When I started thinking about doing Break Free Fest, it was because I was in Austin, Texas for a few years, and I was constantly the only black person that I saw, besides maybe two other people that were rarely there, who were enjoying the show up front, enjoying it. And there was a time where it is a drinking city where everyone thought I was someone else. Oh, I know you, we hung out before. Oh, you're that one girl on a date with you, blah, 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 blah. And I'd be like, no, you don't know me. They'd be like, yes, you are. And I'm just like, please tell me how my Tia and Tamara looking ass is this girl you're speaking of. And they would just assume that they knew who I am, or they'd be like, oh, you have to do more because you're the black girl, we want you to be that black girl. I had to be into everything these guys were into. They were like, oh, have you read Nietzsche? And I'm like, I don't know Nietzsche, who's that? And I came from a military family, so I was new to all this stuff, but I was on my own. And when I got sick with an autoimmune disorder and had to be moved straight to Maryland to get treatment, I was getting texts going, hey, I just saw you yesterday. We've been friends for 2 years. Hey, I hit your butt at the show and you didn't say anything to me. And I'm thinking of this brown person who's getting associated with me or groped, and I'm just first of all, I got sick and it's been over 9 months and I have left that city. And two, why did you do that? And they're like, I thought it was you. And it was always, I thought it was you. And I was like, when can I stop being that other person? I'm making up for a person that I'm not because I want people to like me in this scene that has made me feel like family without going out to shows. I've just been at home listening to records, feeling like I had a community when I didn't. And I would go to hardcore shows and get in fights, and punk shows and oi shows and just get in fights and curse and scream and drink, and I just was not being the person that I wanted to be because I wanted to know people who were not like me in the end. And I came to Philly after I finished treatment, and I was just looking around. I'm in a city that has This Is Hardcore. For years. It is the show to go to across the country for hardcore. There's West Philly punks everywhere, you know, and I'm like crusties coming out of the trees and stuff, you know, of West Philly. And it's like this like place I'd see, it was full of black folk, you know, full of Latinos, you know, full of like Asian communities. And I go to a show and I'm like, okay, I didn't see anyone really. I saw some, not many Mexican folk like I did in Austin, but I saw some, but I was like, okay. And I was just like, you know what, kind of want to do something. And oddly enough, 3 white guys who have been here for over like 30 years doing punk and hardcore were like, do you need help? And I was like, look at these 3 white men coming to my aid. And they were like, what do you need? They got me a venue, a fully backlined festival. I've never had to pay for any of the instruments going on stage, and none of the bands have to worry about traveling for it. You know, the venue at the Rotunda, I haven't had to worry about the Rotunda like not being booked. There's someone who's like, do you need it? You got it? And that's a huge space, very historical to Philly. And it's just like, I felt like they started the wheel for me. And of course I've always like booked it. I'm just like stressing over bands while doing finals at the same time. But I came here to start myself and start something different. But I'm not stepping on the toes of people who have been here. They might not be the most prominent people, but I'm not stepping on their toes. And so having the community help me out, and then grow and grow and grow makes me feel like I've created myself and I've created something I'm really proud of. So it's been pretty awesome so far.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I guess I have two kind of experiences. One is like a young punk rocker, just as a fan and a musician. I definitely felt like I had this issue of not being able to be my whole self in the scene. You know what I'm saying? Because you might be hanging out with someone and they're like, oh, well, you can't really like Minor Threat because they're guilty of being white or something like that, you know? Or, you know, I was in a band when I was a kid, and I'd set up a big celebration for Black History Month, and I wanted the band to play at my Black History Month celebration, and the guys in my band who were white were like, nah, we can't play it because it's like a black only thing. Like, nah, like this is American history, this is your history. So I constantly had those experiences of like being in a scene but not being able to be both my fully black self and my fully punk rock self. When I came to New York City, it was eye-opening because I felt like I was finding a place where I met a lot of people who had some of those similar experiences. And I was able to meet black people, brown people, and open-minded white people who could kind of allow me to be my whole self. But in doing the work that I do in terms of like documenting and telling black stories or telling important stories, there's always a challenge in that community to manifest and create the work that will properly represent what we live on a day-to-day basis. And even right now, the projects that I'm working on is constantly about trying to advocate for representing especially black people in the whole 360 degrees, but there are sometimes people with power, with money, who are ahead of you in those projects who are gonna, you're gonna have to fight with tooth and nail to be able to get that representation out there. And to battle that, you just have to stay focused and always remember who you are.
Okay.
Yeah, never really been in a community. No, it's all good. Yeah, just from where I grew up, Toronto during the grunge scene, going to shows with all white dudes over 6 foot tall who used to protect me in the mosh pit. I mean, it was good. I think though when I got older and started looking at the lack of representation, specifically of black women rockers, that's when I started thinking about community for the younger generation. So a lot of my book is about creating a community and making sure that there is a community for young black women who are into heavy metal, hardcore, and punk, simply because A, I didn't have it myself, and B, I felt that while we are seeing slowly but surely more artists out there, the question is like, what is stopping women from being able to access opportunities in the industry in terms of heavy metal? And my main interest is underground extreme heavy metal, which I find there's more freedom than, let's say, mainstream metalcore or whatever. So I'm really interested in creating communities of women of color and now men of color with my dissertation, in terms of making sure that they feel that they have a connection and a community to really help them, create the music and play the music they want to. Concert photography, it's all about connections, specifically in New York. So I'm working a lot with a lot of Black girls in New York City, just trying to make sure that everybody is connected and that we kind of create opportunities and safe spaces for them to be able to do the work in the underground extreme music scenes.
Nice.
When we started Punk Black, we were a little fortunate and unfortunate. Fortunate because we had to start Punk Black at all, just because there was no sort of representation in our scene. But we were fortunate because I'd been in the band for about 10 years before that in Atlanta, so we'd already built up a certain level of respect amongst our peers. But we still played shows where fucking nobody came out to. But when we started Punk Black, we had like this surge of community support when we started Punk Black. I remember the first Punk Black we started on May 22nd is 2015. We sort of just started it to raise votes for an Afro-punk battle of bands that we were doing. It didn't even cross our mind to like turn it into what it is now. And we did the show, and people just came up to us, and they were just like, "Yo, we needed this. We really need this in Atlanta. We really need you guys to keep doing this." So we started doing it, and the support's just been there. It's always been there. Not monetary support, mind you, but at least like spiritual support. We've had a lot of friends. We had to deal with a lot of bullshit. Since we started in house parties, we had to deal with cops, we had to deal with neighbors and stuff like that. But we've always had like a really, really good amount of support, and we're really thankful for that.
Well, community is a tricky word for me. I feel like there's different layers and levels to it. When I first started my fascination and love for alternative versions of blackness. I'm putting that in quotes.
Yeah.
Because I don't really believe that. I was kind of like on my own out there. When I went to shows, I was often like the only Black person in the crew. And truth be told, it didn't really bother me because I was there for the music. So I wasn't really looking for community. And as I got older and moved to New York and met Black folks who were into the same thing as me, then it was kind of like, okay, we're gonna be friends forever. It was like, come here, but it's hard to form community. I feel like it's something that takes time, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of vulnerability and a lot of risk and a lot of trust. And the spaces where I've found that, it's mainly been around activism work and organizing, working with people to create direct actions to combat police brutality. We did something in Brooklyn called Cop Watch, where we would roam the streets, and whenever we saw a Black person being held up by police, you guys know stop and frisk. Right. It was a really big thing in New York. So we would stop and watch and videotape to make sure that person's rights weren't being violated. So that's something we would do 2 to 3 times a week for a couple hours a night. Wow. So when you're in a car with 2 or 3 other Black folks just driving around your neighborhood, and making sure that the people who look like you are, you're trying your best to keep them safe from state violence, that connects you. And so I found community there amongst those people, because that takes risk and vulnerability to put yourself out there like that. You're exposing yourself to harm. I found community with other parents. We started a school collective because we didn't want to send our kids to school. So we, 6 parents, we took turns taking care of each other's kids throughout the day and created our own lesson plans and our own ideas around what education is. And so I found community there. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot.
You're fine.
But I guess my whole point is just to say that building community takes work. Like, it's rigorous work. And it's not necessarily something that I feel is people should enter into lightly. I think taking care of yourself, knowing who you are, is priority, like your own liberation and your own healing. so that when you do step into community, you're bringing your best self and creating like deep, significant connections.
All right.
Sorry, I ramble.
No, you're fine. Thanks, you guys.
We all do that at this point.
All right, I've got a wild card question, so all of you don't have to answer if you don't feel comfortable. But I wanted to ask, what has the punk movement meant to you as a site to initiate activism for individuals from marginalized communities?
I mean, I definitely feel like it's kind of cliche, but, or are we going in a row?
No.
Okay, sorry. I think it's kind of cliche, but I think punk was very essential in my own political awakening. You know, I think that I can name countless songs and albums that led me to go on to read a book or understand a conflict or an issue better. One that's coming to my mind immediately is like Sandinista by The Clash. That was one of those records that I discovered when I was a little kid in elementary school. I'm putting this on, I'm like, what is a Sandinista? You know what I'm saying? I'm talking to my dad about it, and then when I get a little older, I read about it and understand it. And Rage Against the Machine isn't necessarily a punk band, but they have some punk stuff in there. And I remember their album, Evil Empire, in it, it has like a table with a bunch of books on it. There's Wretched of the Earth, there's Autobiography of Malcolm X, there's a James Baldwin book in there. And I literally spent my high school years like trying to read all the books that are on this inside flap of this album cover because I wanted to understand the music better. And so I think punk really ignited my political awakening, and my political perception is definitely a big part of the documentaries and things that I create, because I really try to advocate. I'm a biased journalist. I try to advocate for Black people. I try to advocate against the capitalist, you know what I'm saying, heteronormative system in the work that I do. And a big part of that comes from the punk rock and stuff that I listen to.
Nice.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so the question was, what has the punk movement meant to you as a site to initiate activism for individuals from marginalized communities?
I think that when I listened to punk, I was listening to the instruments first, and then I got into lyrics, and I dissected that, and I dissected album work, and I wanted to make music videos. It was just like this whole like building yourself up, and when I started paying attention to the lyrics, I started asking questions. I got super into Oi at a very early age. We lived in the UK for a little bit, so I was like, this is it. This is the birthplace. And when I went to go discover those scenes and saw that they were dealing with like nationalism and then like so like you know in the local wars that happened in the UK, I was like confused. I thought it was about music and style and fun, and they were like, nah, there's some lyrics in the bands and patches you can't wear. And I was like, what? And I started diving into patches and symbols and area codes and all these things that like where the Oi scenes like, do not wear this if you are Black. These are the things you shouldn't do. These are the things you should do. This is the slurs you might hear that you might not understand, because some British slurs are wild. You know, like, and so like I was just kind of like learning to take care of myself at a young age, and then like still trying to have fun. And I think that kind of warped my sense of what punk and like activism music was, because they were all in the streets like fight the system, but they're hanging out with someone who's like not okay with like brown folk being in like certain areas, you know, like fight the system, but like women are quiet, or like women are saying fight the like, riot girl system is fighting the system, fight patriarchy, and then there's no one really a person of color, and it's very like cis female centered, you know. And I just felt like there was like I kept trying to find where I could sit, and it's not like that. You have to grab where you can and bring it together. It's not one. There's not one scene that has everything that's going to be okay for you, and you have to figure out and make your way for it. And in making my way, I came to Break Free Fest, and that's where I like to say my education in activism. You know, I've always like done like the things now and then and been punk, and like I did when Trayvon was shot, like, you know, we were marching in Austin, Texas, and I was like, this is it, I'm a part of it, but I couldn't tell my family because, you know, I'm going with Red Guard people. You know, my parents can't know about that. So into that, I started booking Black and brown bands who deal with like from the Philippines, wars I never heard about before, Vietnam, the struggles of like, and then dictators, like all these things I just never thought, and it's all in punk. And you don't have to find it really sometimes. Sometimes it's just right there, you're not listening to it. And that's where the money from Break Free Fest doesn't go really to us. It goes to the communities, because that's the root of it. And I think punk has lost it sometimes, like where we want to talk about how we're fighting the system, but where's that money going?
Right.
Or where is our time outside of punk going? It's like Have Heart said, when I went to go see him recently, they were just like, what are you doing? Like, are you just another barber, you know, like in punk and hardcore? Or are you like trying to be an educator? Are you like helping out? Are you talking to people? And it's like keeping up with that has started like an activism in punk for me, but also just as my own personal record and my awareness. So.
Nice. All right, does anybody else want to touch on it? You don't have to.
Well, I'll say real quick, I'll try to say real quick, that I feel like part of what this genre has taught me is that Blackness is not a monolith, you know, and there's so many different ways to express it, and I feel like that's a radical and revolutionary idea, you know, because meeting other people who look like me, who are into moshing and, you know, tattoos and scarification and, you know, piercings, I was kind of like, oh, dope. Like, I'm not the only person out there like this. And also, you know, whether I'm got a weave in or afro or I'm just like shaved bald, you know, I'm still black, you know. I'm still connected to my blackness, and I'm not like denying or like trying to be white, you know. And also just kind of discovering the, you know, the African and you know, the tribal, I guess for lack of a better word, aspects to the adornment that comes with this genre, and seeing how it ties to tribal dress. You know, that, I don't know, that really encouraged me and that really excited me, and I think it just it opened up my worldview, because I think when I first started, like being the only black person, you know, I definitely kind of like questioned, you know, like, is this weird? Am I weird for liking this? So, you know, blackness is everything, you know, and we can plug into everything that's existed, and we have been everything that's existed. I feel like that's what kind of punk taught me.
Nice.
That's the idea it put in my head.
I feel like I'm always asking my sister, am I weird for liking rock music? All right, anybody else? All right, we're gonna move on. I like that what we're saying about, you know, this black identity idea of trying to say, am I still black? Am I still black for liking this? Can I still be black? So I wanted to go into our individual questions, so this is a great segue. I had the pleasure of interviewing Chris L. Terry and inviting him to be on this panel after he recently wrote and published his new novel, which is on the table, Black Card. Yeah, congratulations. Can you talk about the first time you heard the term Black Card?
The first time I heard the term Black Card? I got a really distinctive memory. I already knew the term, but in maybe 2009, I was working in African American cultural affairs at an art school in Chicago, and we were about to go on summer break. I was a student worker, and my boss is like, all right, Chris, you know, if you want a job in the fall and you still want to keep your Black Card, you need to watch Love Jones over the break. That was kind of her idea of like some black pop culture that I needed to absorb to understand something, which is a tricky thing, especially, you know, I think that movie, there's some problematic stuff in there. There's some stalker behavior, some toxic masculinity, and some rampant bouginess that doesn't really align with my anti-capitalist stance. But I laughed my ass off at the slam poetry, and I love Lorenz Tate anyway. So that was maybe the most. That's like the most memorable Black Card conversation I've had. It was also at a time I was still kind of finding my way into blackness. As everyone has probably noticed in the room, I'm pale as hell and I have blue eyes. So to a lot of people, I look like a white man with kinky hair. So I was like, yeah, she thinks I have a Black Card. It was affirming that she tried to take away my Black Card because it meant that I had one in the first place. So yeah, shout out to my old boss.
Nice. And then to follow up on that, panelists, can we go around and say, have you ever heard the term black card? Everybody else? What's been your experience with it? Yeah?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Does anybody want to talk about it a little bit?
Oh yeah. Honestly, I've heard the term black card so many times. People try to give them out. People try to take them away. Man, growing up, my black card was revoked several times. It's like you haven't listened to, you haven't saw what movie? I'm not really like super for the whole black card thing, just because, I mean, I don't think anybody really has one, and I really don't think we can really give them out to people. Like we can't just give them out like a membership card. But the first time I heard it was probably, it had to be in elementary school.
I think the white person was the person who brought that up to me first. They're just like, do I have a black card? And I was like, a what? Do you have a And I'm like waiting for them to be like, open their wallet. Like, actually, it's right here. Yeah, this. Do you have one of these? And I'm like, no. So yeah, they were just like, I should have one, you know, like I hang out with black folk, I live in the hood, I say the N-word, and I'm like, the what? And I'm it's like trying to process, it's like anime sweat drop, I'm just like, what? Yeah, that was the first time I ever heard it, and like even like I remember years ago, one of my best friends was just like, yeah, everyone says I have one and you don't, and I'm just like, I want to die now. And,
Well,
sorry, go ahead. In Canada, we didn't really have a black card per se, but I think that, yeah, I mean, how we deal with blackness in Canada is completely different than in the States.
Wow.
I don't think I ever had a black card. I guess in hindsight, I mean, I think that in talking about music, and even within, when you are talking about black representation in, let's say, rock music, depending on the genre, the subgenre that you're focused on within this kind of heavy music, can still be judged on blackness. So I know that if there's a really great book from Maureen Mahan, The Right to Rock. She's a professor at NYU, and she does kind of a history of the Black Rock Coalition. Has anyone heard of that in New York City? Okay. So they've been around for over 30 years, I believe, and so that's where Living Color basically came out of. So you have blackness in terms of rock and roll that still has to have elements of black music. So if there's a feel when you're listening to rock and roll that's got soul or funk, or there's a rhythmic groove that you hear in other kind of genre, blues and jazz, that is seen as authentically black rock music. So what happens when black people are involved in music that does not have any elements of black music? And that's when we start talking about whether we have a black card or not. So because I'm interested in extreme, like grind and power violence and stuff like that, that's my thing. You don't necessarily hear elements of black music in those genres. So simply because of my listening preference and what I write about as a journalist, that's when my black card gets revoked. So it's okay to listen to Living Color as a black person, or it's okay to listen to 24/7 Spies, or even Fishbone, because we hear those authentic elements of blackness, of American blackness. But what happens when black kids are interested in Fugazi, you know, or early Rollins Band? Well, I didn't say early Rollins Band, maybe like, No Means No from Vancouver, or like some of the underground stuff where there's no elements of blackness. So I think that's a really interesting conversation when talking about the black card.
I guess I almost think like sometimes, for me, even like with the grindcore and stuff like that, I almost feel like there's always an element of blackness in it, you know, because it's like, like a lot of these musicians, what is the first band that inspired them to pick up a guitar and play in the first place, you know? And I think that anything that comes, at least if it's an American thing, if it's an American expression, whether it's a white person or an Asian person or whatever, or any race, if you're an artist making music here, I feel like there's gonna be some, just like there's going to be some Latino, some different other elements in what I do that inspire me. There's going to be some Blackness in that thing too, you know? And so, yeah.
Well, one thing, like, sorry, if I could add something, I think one thing that's important is that within Black communities, you know, we have to stop feeling like we have the power to take away one's Blackness or to authenticate one's Blackness, especially when it comes to music, which, you know, we all have access to a myriad of different musical genres through Spotify, through Tidal or whatever. So it's really hurtful when you have one Black person saying to another Black person, oh, you don't listen to Cardi B or, you know, whoever out there. I'm old, I'm sorry, I don't know who all these people are. But anyway, I mean, you know, like we still judge each other in terms of our Black authenticity based on the music. And I think that is what really alienates a lot of Black youth from even sharing their musical preferences with other people.
I can definitely relate to that. One time I had my Black card revoked by an entire lunch table of Black people. When I said I listened to System of a Down, they're like, devil's music. It's like, I'm sorry. Ola, I think you wanted to say something. Can you?
Yeah, I just definitely affirm, I'm sorry, Laina.
Close enough.
I'm sorry. I affirm that the idea of like gatekeeping Blackness, it needs to stop. You know, there's 1,000,000,001 ways to be Black times a million, you know, to infinity. We cannot gatekeep Blackness, you know, and I feel like the Black card conversation is very subjective. You know what I mean? Like, people try to take my card away because I don't know how to play spades.
Oh, no.
You know? And I'm like, what? Are y'all mad?
I think they felt that in their soul.
Did I lose you?
Go to Georgia and not know how to play spades is wild for me.
Right. It's subjective, it's regional, it's classist. You know, there's different levels to it. So I feel like it's a unique idea. And I think we need to, you know, instead of like gatekeeping and let's like, you know, just hook each other up and let each other know. Like, if anybody wants to teach me how to play spades, I'm here. But I remember when I hadn't seen 5 Heartbeats, and people were quoting from it, and I was like, I don't get it, you know? No one's coming to see you. And I was like, oh, okay, I finally saw it, and now I get that joke. You know, so I think instead of like revoking, just like fill people in, like clue people in, like if everybody's laughing and one person isn't, like let them know, oh, this is from, you know, Love Jones, or this is from the Michael Jackson movie, you know, when he's singing to the rat, like, let us know what's happening. You know, let's talk about it.
Right.
I feel like that's a more fun conversation, you know, than opposed to like, how come you don't know this?
Right.
Where you, like, you never saw that? You know, I feel like that's very like judgy space to come from, so.
Right, we want more people to open the door.
Yeah,
to
let us
share.
know. Let us know. Like, I meet, you know, I'm a librarian, right? So I have this project with all these Black women's books, and like I meet people who've never read Zora Neale Hurston, Black people, and you know, there's a part of me that's like, you know, I'm not gonna take away your Black card, but I'm still kind of like. You know, like I make collages. I have a collage with Fannie Lou Hamer, and you know, I have Black people who are like, who is that? You know, I'm like, Fannie Lou Hamer, I don't know who that is. You know, and there's a part of me that's just kind of like, how come you don't know that? You know, and if I had like that Black card revoking mindset, like I'd be like, you know, what's up with your Blackness? But I understand that, you know, the world kind of, not the world, but society kind of like divides us in a way that is really arbitrary and really unfair. So, you know, I'm not going to go there. So.
Sounds good, because I'll have to go get some books from you. I need to know who these people are. All right, going back to Chris. One of my favorite things about the book that you wrote was that the main character was left unnamed. I loved your response to this question. What did you want to show the reader by doing this?
I wanted to say something else about Black cards first, but also a lot of white people, especially at my old job, were like, is this book about credit cards? What's
Oh,
cooking?
no.
Yeah. So it's interesting how specified the term can be. Some people thought that the narrator was unnamed because I wanted it to sound very autobiographical, when in fact I was trying to maintain a certain distance from the narrator, and I wanted to pay tribute to one of my favorite books, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, which is an older book about, and the recurring theme is the way it's difficult to find a sense of yourself when people are constantly projecting their prejudices or their preconceived ideas about you onto you before you get a chance to assert yourself. I was working in a similar space with this book. Sometimes I was like, I want to write like a kind of black mixed race Invisible Man. And then I was thinking, this is very similar to the original Invisible Man. And it kind of gave me a little bit more strength to think about it as a black experience, to kind of make it wider, like Ola was talking about. Yeah, so that's why I chose an unnamed narrator.
Yeah, it's awesome. I loved seeing that perspective. You don't see that in a lot of books, so that was really cool to see it. After reading your book, where does your audience go from here? What conversations are you hoping that they will have or that this book will spark?
Yeah, I was trying to write about microaggressions, basically, just like a kind of atmosphere of microaggressions, of small bits of behavior and attitudes that can create a really unwelcome space. So I wanted people to, I wanted like white readers or non-black readers to get a greater understanding of how some very minor things in their lives can be very unwelcoming, can be very damaging for other people. That was one of the first things. I hope that like people of color who had kind of dipped their toes into like white alternative subcultures, I wanted to reach out to other people who had had that experience and kind of try to create a community or open a line of conversation about those experiences among other people who have been like the chocolate chip and the cookie, if you will.
Yep.
Yeah, so those are my two things.
Yeah, I loved it. I could definitely relate growing up in a Midwestern town. You know, we had cornfields. We had a tractor that would drive down the street in front of your car, and you just had to wait.
Wow.
So being the chocolate chip in the cookie, I definitely related to that, and I love the book. So check it out. Write the name down. Go get it. It just came out. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, next we have Ola. I've got some questions for you. You are traveling the country with your books, written by Black women as the foundation. You are magnifying our voices. What has been your most memorable moment from doing this?
Oh, wow. There's been so many. Well, I started the Free Black Women's Library in 2015. And when I first started it with 100 books. All the books are written by Black women. And my very first pop-up was in my neighborhood, right across the street from a playground. I set up the books on a brownstone stoop. And I had on some gold leggings, and I started blasting some music, and I just started kind of dancing while the books were out there, just putting on this little performance. And, people walked by and watched, and once I finished dancing, I let people know that this is a new project, and the way it works is that for every book you bring, you get to take a book, as long as it's by a Black woman writer. And there was a 5-year-old, maybe 6-year-old girl there with her mom, a little Black girl. And, she was very intrigued and obviously a book lover, and she looked through the books and found a children's book that she was really excited about. And so she went home with her mom and came back like an hour and a half later with a book to trade. And that was my very first trade. And ever since then, I've traded over like thousands of books with people all over the country. But I think that was significant for different reasons. I mean, I guess I'm kind of superstitious, and I feel like the fact that it was a child that kind of like started this literary movement gave me a lot of really good luck. And she has come to the library over and over again over the years, and as she gets older, her reading gets more advanced. And so that's been a beautiful thing to witness. You know, I have a bunch of books by the Cheetah Girls, and so she's reading those now. Whereas when we first started, she was reading storybooks. Her mom still comes and her mom gets books. So that was a pretty memorable moment. But there have been so many others. One of the things about the library that I find really magical is that when people come for a very specific book and the book that they want might not be there, but then someone else will bring it shortly after, so they get that book. You know, for instance, someone will come looking for like Kindred by Octavia Butler, right?
Okay.
And the library is open from noon to 5. So they'll come at like 12:15, look through the whole collection. Right now I have over 1,200 books, and they kind of like wait around, they hang out, they talk to people, they flirt, they do whatever. And then someone shows up with a stack of books to trade, and among their stack is Kindred by Octavia Butler.
Nice.
And that's something that happens at least once a month. So I think that's, I don't know, there's something memorable about that. And there's something that I've learned to, you know, just kind of, that's something I've kind of like come to look forward to, you know, because everybody has like their reading personality. You know, some people just want erotica, some people just want nonfiction. So I like when someone comes with a very specific book in mind and they find it at the library, because it's random what I have. You never know what you're gonna get. And I like that I like that people are getting their needs met through the project.
That's awesome. It's like the universe aligns in that moment. All right.
Exactly.
So what is the book that people need to read right now? What's one that has got you hooked?
Oh my God. How much time do we have? Girl, you know that's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, one book that people need to read and read again and read repeatedly is Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. If you haven't read that book, please read it. It takes place in 2024. Octavia Butler, definitely punk as fuck in her writing. Amazing, brilliant science fiction icon. You know, Dawn, Wild Seed, Fledgling, Kindred, gave us tons of books, MacArthur Genius. But Parable of the Sower is really, really relevant right now in what's happening in this country and what's been happening. And the main character is a Black queer woman. And I think a lot of people in this room might relate to her struggles and relate to her ability to thrive within a chaotic, fucked up world. You know, her choosing to thrive and the way she does that. So please read that book. And then after you read it, please send me a DM and let me know what you thought. Since Toni Morrison just passed, a lot of people are reading her work. Really powerful. There's an amazing book called Freshwater by a non-binary Nigerian writer named Akweki Emezi. If you're a non-binary person, queer person who's wrestling with an unsettling in yourself, it's a really incredible, powerful book. Everyone should read Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor.
I think I heard of that one. That's a good one.
Yeah. The stars and I could go on. I'm a librarian. That's like, it's such a hard question for a librarian to answer. You know, but I'm always down to talk about books with anyone, either face to face or through Instagram. You know, I get messages from people all the time looking for book suggestions for their kids, for their friends, for their classrooms, for themselves. So please feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Well, thank you.
If you want a book written by a Black woman specifically, come to me.
Yeah, after our Q&A, we will have some time to mingle, so definitely hit her up. All right, now we're gonna move to Laina. Laina, you have a book too, which was nonfiction. You wrote about how punk music genres project that they are inclusive spaces, but fail to block out the race and gender issues in the outside world. Can you share what made you come to this conclusion? Sorry, maybe that was too big.
Sorry. So real life. Well, I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, as a lifer in the metal scene, and somebody that, has been to like thousands of shows and usually been, the only black person there. Oh, and also looking at the dynamics of, let's say there's 2 black people at the show, and then kind of looking at the relationships between each other, which is, there's usually friction, because some people like to be the token black in these situations. Years of going through this and just wondering, like, where are the black people? If I think that, back in the olden days when we used to listen to radio, FM radio, there was such a variance of different genres on the radio, and that's how I discovered the Clash and a lot of like The Cure and Depeche Mode and stuff was through the radio. So it was a very natural, organic way to find music. So I always kind of was a little weirded out by being told that listening to Depeche Mode when I was, young was somehow a white thing. But then also how these scenes of people who were interested in the Clash and started their own bands, and how just naturally gravitating towards this music, there was, like, where were the black people, especially people of my generation, where we grew up to, and we had a myriad of genres that we had easy access to, like people do now, just through a different medium. So it was really about asking the question of where are people? Like why there isn't enough black people there. And from talking to people over the years, a lot of it had to do with, racism. A lot of it had to do with racialized sexism. And also looking within, especially within the punk scene, where there is this automatic assumption that, with the mix of social issues and social justice and politics within the genre, it should be more inclusive, not just to black women, but also to men, black men and people of color. And it's not. And one thing that got me into a lot of trouble a few years ago was I wrote a documentary review for Bitch magazine on The Punk Singer with Kathleen Hanna, and I absolutely hated it.
Uh-oh.
And I got death threats from people because they were like, how dare you, this is Kathleen Hanna. But the documentary was devoid of women of color. And there were women of color in the Riot Grrrl scene. And I could go on and on, I just hated it. I hated it. And, but I think even just things like that where images of black women are just excised out of these historical narratives about underground music scenes is disturbing. And it's also interesting because that westernized aesthetic of a heteronormative white woman is still crucial to describe this genre, even though this genre is also about political activism and social justice for people of color. And that's why there's more black people and people of color within punk than there is in heavy metal and in hardcore, is because it's more accessible, because there's affinity of both the music and the social justice interests within this culture. So I think that there are a lot of issues within these scenes. And so that's why I wrote the book, was to not only interview people that were in the scenes, but also kind of look at issues of race and sexuality within the underground music scenes.
Yeah, and this is also a good book you might want to check out. I recommend. Laina, what advice do you have for other people of color who also love heavy music or alternative music but feel ostracized from the black community? Like, where do we go from there?
I think that I think one thing that we need to remember is that the current political climate is really horrific for anybody within alternative underground scenes, simply because the expression of politics, whether you are a left or a right person, it gets magnetized when it's melded in with heavy music. So I have had over the years, especially when my book came out, I had a lot of DMs from young black kids who were saying, I really want to go to the show at St. Vitus, but I'm afraid. What should I do? They really want to financially support these underground music artists, but they're afraid they're going to get their ass kicked. Right? So now in the last 3 years, it's even gotten worse. Because I don't even want to go to shows because I don't want to get my ass kicked. Right? So I think that I always tell people to try, and it's hard, but try and find like-minded people to go with. Always go in a group. So it doesn't have to be, black folk. If you're black, you can have, your white friends too, or friends from other ethnicities, but go in a group and just stay out of the mosh pit if you've never been in a pit.
Oh, yeah.
Your first time is not the best time to go.
Those elbows.
But I think that it's just really about your safety, and it's really unfortunate that we have to have this discussion now, but we really have to be safe out there, because there's a lot, especially in the metal scenes, there's a lot of Proud Boys in the New York scene. There's Proud Boys going to shows. There's a lot of nationalists, going to shows. I mean, I've known some folks, especially in Philly, over the years, like, these were my dudes that I used to drink with and I used to party with. And since Trump, when he first ran in 2016, I saw sides of them that I didn't even know they had. So I think that for every black person, and I think that's true, it's just because these, about this. Sorry, I had to edit myself there for a second. Be careful of who your friends are. Go in groups, try and stay safe. On the other hand, I also believe that you need to also protect yourself and fight back. Because I find that I've been in situations where I've had beer bottles thrown at my head. I've been assaulted at shows. I've been called the N-word at shows. And I find that if you stand up to these people, they will run. They just want to let you know that you are not wanted in that space. So what you have to do is to let them know that you have every right to be in that space as they do.
I love what you're saying right now. That really hits me right here. I actually went to a Lizzo concert in Detroit by myself because, I usually go to shows by myself. And it scared me that I had gotten such a bad reaction. I got pushed out of the way. They're like, I want to see Lizzo, get out of the way. And I just had such a bad time at that show. And then when I went to New York and went to the same show to see Lizzo again with my sister, totally different, just because I had someone standing there with me to protect me. It's crazy how that can have such a big effect. Laina, you are a music journalist. As I've gotten older and from other people I've spoken to in terms of metalcore and heavy metal, we were kind of shocked that this is still going, that it hasn't really fizzled out yet. So in your experiences, what do you see coming next for the metal scene? Where are we headed?
That's a good question. I think that it's weird because I think that in some ways mainstream metal, Bring the Horizon, and if somebody says that's not metal, you can let me know. But I think there's like a lot of like metalcore that's still doing well. Obviously the new Slipknot is like, it's pretty good. I find it formulaic, but it's pretty good. I really think that where the scene is growing is the underground scene. There's a lot of amazing independent artists that are really pushing the boundaries of heavy metal. There's so many subgenres within the genre of heavy metal. I think that for people who are not interested in the genre or don't know a lot about it, you need to discover all of the nooks and crannies. I was just talking before the panel about being excited that like Lord Mantis and Abigail Williams are coming out with new albums in November. These are like incredible underground black and metal bands from Chicago. So I think that the underground scene is where it's flourishing with great bands who are putting out really innovative music. I prefer I'm not really into mainstream metal at all. It doesn't interest me. But on the other hand, financially and commercial-wise, it's doing pretty well right now. And then you have your bands like Judas Priest or Iron Maiden, who just did tours this summer. And it's more of a nostalgia act at this point.
Right.
So it's kind of like the new wave of British heavy metal will always be popular. And mainstream bands will always be kind of commercially popular. But I think that in terms of artistic developments and innovations, it's the underground scene that's happening.
Nice. So watch the underground. All right. Now we're going to move to Will Cooper. Will, you have traveled through the heart of America for Vice Does America in 2016. I'm not going to make you do the hog call. To the point where you did that hog calling contest and won in Iowa. What are your biggest takeaways in general from that Vice Does America documentary?
Oh my God, I mean, that was a really incredible and crazy experience. So basically, it was a travel political show. We traveled from Los Angeles to DC in an RV. It was me, a Muslim Pakistani man, and a Spanish-speaking woman. And we did a lot of crazy stuff during that trip that I'm still sort of dealing with. I think that one of the things that was apparent to me and has become even more apparent to me now as we get into this impeachment situation and we start looking at, if you tune on Fox News and then you tune on MSNBC, is that America is definitely paying attention to two very different types of media. And there's this deep polarization that's happening where people have these very stratified identities, and these identities are so opposed to each other that I think that I'm just nervous. When I traveled across the country during that trip, I knew that Trump was going to win. It was very, very apparent to me after speaking to people and talking to people.
Wow.
And now I feel like people's worldviews are even further divided and will continue to be divisive. And that makes me worry about potential acts of violence. One of the main spots we went to on that trip was we stopped and met with the Bundy Ranch, which were the people who had the standoff against the federal government. And these are people who, stockpile weapons. These are people who stood off again. They held guns against FBI agents and stuff like that. So there's that element out there in America, and obviously I'm totally for impeaching the president, but I worry about what happens as we get closer and closer to the election, and the intensity and the anger and the divisiveness that exists in this country, how that's going to boil to the top.
That does sound worrying. Let's keep it a little lightheaded.
Sorry.
Sorry. No, that was good. I love it. I do. So I'm going to take it a different direction. For this question, because of your journalism and experience with different bands and media, we see artists now having direct contact with their fans through things like Instagram, social media, Facebook, in a way that they didn't have before. So in terms of journalism, where do we see the future of journalism going in the middle of this dynamic? Because now they can talk to fans directly after the show and go, yeah, it was great.
Right. I think that what's going to happen, I think media kind of goes through periods where there'll be a new hot form of media, and you'll see that form of media proliferate a lot. There was a time when there was a ton of print magazines, and magazine was a super cool thing. There was a time when there was a ton of newspapers, and that was super cool. Right now, we went through a period where the internet media was popping, and everybody had websites, and that was huge. And now we're seeing a lot of people get laid off. We're seeing a lot of websites close or consolidate. And so I think that there's just going to be new forms of ways for people to tell stories that are going to get bigger. And what's going to happen is that the people who can do it really well and do it in a dope way are the ones that are going to trickle to the top. You know what I'm saying? And the people who don't have a passion for it or don't have a love for it are going to disappear. And I think that, I actually think that zines and independent publications like Blkgrlswurld, I think are in a really cool and special way, because you guys have generated an intimate connection with your readership, and you're covering things driven by a deep passion for it. And I definitely feel like if there's zine creators out here, people making independent zines, I definitely feel like there's a way to translate those kind of things that you're doing in the publishing world on an independent level and magnify those and make those bigger. And I could definitely see certain zines becoming bigger players in what's going on. But also, it's cool to just keep it independent and small as well. But I think the good stuff is going to trickle always to the top. But I definitely think we've seen a lot of websites and things go, and we're going to see a lot more as these new tools come about.
All right, Vaughn, I've got some questions for you now.
Oh, man.
So I didn't know anything about Afro Punk Fest in Brooklyn until my sister moved to NYC. It was like a whole world opened up. I saw people in all kinds of costumes and things. Punk Black is based in Atlanta. Can you tell us about other region-specific things that are happening in that area that you might want to share, or talk more about Punk Black?
We said region-specific things, like for Atlanta, or just in general, like nationally?
Let's do Atlanta first, and then if you know more, hey.
Oh, okay. Honestly, Punk Black is one of the only organizations doing a lot for the, I was going to say PLC rock, but we've been calling it POC rock in Atlanta. I sort of like that name as far as the genre name, but as far as like the POC rock community, Punk Black is one of the only people really doing stuff in Atlanta right now. Afropunk comes every now and then, but Afropunk's pool on their Atlanta fan base weakens more and more every year. Thank the gods. But there's a lot of different organizations going on right now. Like Jonga's in the Pit is out of Texas. The Black and Brown Festival's also out of Texas. There's also one in what's it called? Not LA, somewhere in California. There's a Black and Brown Festival in Chicago, and there's also a new festival called the Black Alt Festival, or Blah.alt. You can look it up on Instagram. That's happening in North Carolina.
Nice. All right, sounds good to me. When we think about artists, I know you're a musician, and I guess I want to touch on what got you into organizing events, and that the fact that you're doing a festival that isn't, we did it once and we're done. It's continuous, right? You're trying to do it every year. I think you do events like once a month, kind of, or?
We do events once a month. We do Atlanta Festival once a year, and now we have a festival in Atlanta, Chicago, Oakland, New York, and DC that we do once a year. Oh, what was the other rest of the question? I'm sorry, I missed it.
How do you keep it going?
Support and consistency. The biggest thing in business or anything in life, I feel like, is definitely consistency. We have to do a Punk Black every month because people in Atlanta, we really, really need it. I mean, personally, I need it. Like, I just need to go to a Punk Black once a month and be able to just hang out with like other people of color who are into the same shit that I'm into. But we just keep doing it because we love it. We like literally love it. Not just because, especially for me, being in a band too, it's almost it's like a lot of self-gratification. We're also helping other bands and helping other bands develop on the scene, but we're also helping ourselves at the same time, so we can see it from that perspective as well. When I first started doing, just like being in a rock band in general, we started about 10 years ago. I was in an all-black band called Tragedy Called Truth. And we dealt with a lot of bullshit that bands go through around that time period, just not knowing how to do anything, not really running the band like a business. And the scene was really, really divided at that time. So when Punk Black started, it really united a scene in general, because even the white rock scene in Atlanta right now is really, really divided. So this is sort of like the only organized space that people can hang out.
That's nice. All right, we're gonna move to Scouty Laina. You put on a Punks of Color event called Break Free Fest in Philly. Were you always part of the underground music events in Philly? What got you into the ones in Philly?
I kind of came out of nowhere. I just like moved from Maryland, and I was just like, oh, what a great city. There's so much to it here. I'm going to try to go to some shows. And I just got here right when This Is Hardcore was starting. And I was like, I want to go. And I went to like some side shows, but it was basically just like America's Got Talent for hardcore kids. They're just like all doing like backflips and shit, and like throwing, there's skate highs in the ceiling, it's just like a wild free-for-all, but it's like I got hurt really bad. I got my nose like punched by, like there's always that one person who's like the biggest person in the room who's like wearing too tight of a polo or a t-shirt, and they're just like, oh, and you're like, I gotta watch out for that person, and then you do, and then all of a sudden you're just like, that was me. And I was just kind of like, what the hell? And everyone like laughed and made fun of it, and like this was all types of messed up. And I was just kind of like, that was a really weird move. I've never had that before. And I was just like listening to all these bands. I remember like Texas had all these bands coming out of it. And then I was hearing about like Glue, and there was like Amygdala, and there was just like all these bands that were popping up, and I really was like interested in it. And I just wasn't seeing them happen in Philly. And I was still new to the scene, so I didn't want to tread on anyone, you know. I didn't want to be like, oh, this place sucks. It wasn't bad. It was just like, I wanted to see more, especially from our community, from different communities, like people of color. And so I just started like whispering around, like, hey, do you know who's the booker? I didn't even know who the bookers were in the city. I was just like, who made that show happen? And there's venues closing down left and right out here. So I was just like, you know, this was up, this is down, this was problematic, now it's not problematic. It was like all these things happening, and I was trying to keep a hold of it, and I was just like, I just gotta do something. And I just did Break Free Fest, and we did it for 1 year, and still going on strong.
Nice. That leads into my next question. For the future, what are your top takeaways, and like what's next? Where are you trying to go with this? Because I know Break Free Fest was in 2019, right? Ish? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So where are you headed?
Oh yeah. For Break Free Fest is headed is I just think I've let go personally of that anger that I had the first year. You know, I've let go of that anger and that issue like centering around certain fests in the city. You know, I just was like, this fest is so ways like just I let it go. I even said at the fest this year, I was like, our anger is important, but it's just as important as our joy. And like this is now about our joy. This festival is about being in a community that you learn something. Like someone just told me that like they saved someone's life with the Narcan demo we had.
Wow.
And it like brought me to tears, you know, or someone said, this is my family now. This is the people I visit the country. If I'm here, I can hang out with them because I know them from Break Free Fest. And that's what Break Free is going to go towards. I think that it's about centering our joy. And there's so much out there that's so important. And like we can bring our anger in, but you have an area to bring that in. No one's going to be like, okay, let that go. You don't have to let it go, you know, and that's what the music's about. I want to make it more about music and art and vending. If you have something you want to show, let me know about it. What other spots in Philly can we go to? We don't have to stay at the Rotunda. And we're 2 days. So what if one of the days is free? I'm terrible at winking. So, you know, like I want it to be accessible. That's the biggest thing is accessibility, whether it's like, physically having accessible, emotionally accessible, just like what is it's for the people, and that's what it's always going to be about. And I want that to continue, but I want it to get bigger. I want a bigger audience, you know. I want more people to come because I want my family to grow. I don't want people to come in as just basically like guests of the show. I want my family to grow, and that's kind of the future of it.
Nice. I'm excited to see where it goes. Gotta have to come back to Philly.
Better.
All right, so I'm gonna have some more general questions for everybody again. So it's 2019 and punk is still a vehicle for expression. Have any of you noticed a change in how you express yourself now in comparison to 10 or 20 years ago?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know if there's like a inline or.
You guys can do free for all for these ones.
I'd say definitely. I mean, just because people change in 6 months. So, you know, 10 years, I'm like a completely different person than I was 10 years ago. And it's way easier for me to express my emotions, especially through music, than it, you know, was back then. Especially with the sphere we're in right now, there's a lot of new, you know, POC rock organizations, and there's just a lot of places that we can, you know, express ourselves. And back then, you know, it wasn't encouraged. I mean, in a lot of communities, it's still not encouraged, but at least, you know, now we have a place where we can do it at.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm twice as old now as I was 20 years ago, and so I've matured like this much, you know. But I also switched from playing in bands to writing, and I like it feels a little bit more meditative. You know, it's cathartic in a different way. It's a slow burn, and I can spend more time with my thoughts, spend more time with my feelings. And I wasn't putting that much craft into working on songs. Especially collaborating with other people on making songs. I feel like I have a little bit more ownership and can feel a little bit truer to myself.
Right, because it's just you writing.
Yeah, no one's late to band practice when you're writing a book.
That's a good one.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I recently, in February, started therapy, and I think that was one of the best decisions that I've made. I think when we were talking earlier about anger, I definitely had a lot of angst, you know, and a lot of issues with masculinity and stuff like that. And those are things that I've written about a lot over the years. But therapy has, I think, been just a breakthrough in terms of me understanding myself, understanding my emotions. And I feel just like so more in touch with who I am. I still love angry music and getting crazy, you know, and especially when I was playing in bands, I would do a lot of physical stuff to like push my body to see if I could hurt myself, like weird, psychological stuff when performing, or get in the pit and go really crazy as a way to like, get out that energy. But now that I think, more in tune with who I am and what I'm about, like I don't necessarily need those kind of physical things as much, and I feel better about it. So I definitely recommend therapy for everybody if you feel like that's something you want to do.
Good. Sounds good to me. Anybody else want to jump on?
Yeah, I'm in this weird space of being like a middle-aged Black woman who still is really into metal, and I don't really know what to do. I was never one to wear, like, I have my metal t-shirts. I don't wear them in public. And I feel like because I'm in academia, it is a weird transition where I'm still writing and doing and talking about the music that I'm passionate about, but I'm doing it in a different way. And I really enjoy it, but there is something about getting older, and like if I was a white dude, and I have lots of older white dude friends who they can still get away with, going to shows and pulling out the old Iron Maiden t-shirt and having some PBRs with their friends and then going home to the wife and the kids. But for women, it's different, where if a woman decides to put on her leather miniskirt and her black tank top and go to a metal show with the girls, it's seen as something completely different, where she's desperate or she's a whore or she's looking to, go backstage or whatever. But there still is this space for old school heads like me where we don't necessarily fit in. So even though I like where I am in terms of, working on a dissertation on extreme heavy metal, I still kind of am stuck between wanting to go to a lot of shows and like wanting to drink excessively like I used to.
Oh my goodness.
Until you get that middle-aged bulge. I'm just telling y'all, this is coming. I think that it's a strange place to be. I think I'm down to seeing like my favorite shows, like Neurosis plays in New York once a year. I'll do anything to go see Neurosis. Like, so there's a few bands that I will always see, but it is kind of weird kind of being in this very youthful, masculine, heteronormative scene and realizing as you get older that you're slowly kind of coming out of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, anybody else want to jump on that one, or we can move on? Yeah.
I'll say I definitely veggie back on the idea of therapy. It's something I encourage. I feel like it's pretty much necessary to do that work around psychic violence, living in heteronormative, racist, sexist, capitalist, patriarchal society. That comes with different forms of violence, different forms of prejudice and bias, and therapy is necessary. And even if you have never dealt with any of that, even if you grew up in an ideal, two-parent household with a dog and were never spanked or told you were loved every day of the week, I feel like, therapy is just a chance for you to like learn yourself, and gain emotional intelligence, and think about what type of statement you want your life to be, and what type of friend you want to be, what type of lover, artist, person, right? So it's a chance for you to self-reflect. So I definitely encourage that. And I have been, gone to therapy for years, different forms of therapy, group therapy, talk therapy, art therapy, movement therapy. And, in the same vein, I think it has helped me to I don't say love who I am because that's kind of corny and I'm also still working on it, but I think accept who I am, you know, and not see my weirdness as a defect of character or lacking or, you know, but just like, it's just me, you know? So there was a time when I might have dressed a certain way or presented a certain way, energetically and visually, because I was like trying to prove a point or, I don't know, just explore. And now I don't have to do that anymore, you know? So there are days when I'm super femme and then there are days when I'm butch. Like and it is what it is. I'm the same person underneath the clothes. There are days when I have to put on my mom face and deal with some bullshit at my daughter's school. So I have to put on that mask, as Dunbar says. And then there are days when I can go to a rock show and be half naked and I'm still the same person.
Right.
You know, so I definitely encourage that trying different types of therapy, you know, and different ways of discovering the uniqueness and the beauty and the creativity that you're meant to bring, like your potential. And then it won't really matter because change is constant, you know. In that book, Parable of the Sower, she says God is change. You know, that's one of the tenets within the community belief system is that God is change, not a he or she, but a constant moving, a constant developing, constant growing, expanding. And I think, you know, therapy and self-discovery is something that encourages that change.
All right, thanks you guys.
Sorry, can I add just one thing? I think I think anger can also be used as a positive, and that by holding on to anger means that we're alive. So I think that like instead of like we might move away from kind of being involved in, let's say, angry music to something on the other end. But I think that I'm really interested in like how anger through music can be used as a liberatory mechanism. So how we can find our independence and our liberation through angry music. And I think that's something that we'll never hopefully grow out of, but it's just taking that energy and that assertiveness and changing it for the positive. I'm a big fan of Henry Rollins, circa 1980s, so that's where that comes from in terms of like taking what you have and turning it around into something that's beneficial for you. And so sometimes anger is a really good thing to have. And it's also good for Black people to fight back with in terms of really acknowledging that what is happening is not good for me, and I'm going to make sure that you know that what you're doing to me is not acceptable. Whatever manifestation that is, I think that when we're dealing with interactions in the scene, that can save our lives in some points.
Wow, I really like that takeaway. That's nice. All right, well, you guys have been so good with me peppering you guys with questions. Right now, I'm gonna open it up to the room. So raise your hand if you want the microphone. All right, and Tusif's gonna come by with it. Oh, it's up here, hold on.
Is this on? Oh, hi. First off, thank you all so much for holding and speaking at this panel. I guess this question could be mainly directed at Laina, but I feel like you could apply it to a lot of you. It's about academia. Specifically, I know that even like in passing, you all talked about being in academia or currently like in it, and I think that being Black and being queer can be incredibly a radical act in the systems of academia and those kinds of like institutions. And I've been kind of struggling or trying to come to grips with how to, I guess, or how do you legitimize your work when you're talking about the representation of people who've historically been excluded from art movements, when you're talking about art academia without, and I guess to quote my professors, going on a visibility quest, especially when there is that power dynamic and there is that contentiousness both on the individual level of the professor and the institution you're presumably relying on for your own credibility.
It's extremely, extremely difficult. I'm not going to lie. I am lucky at Columbia because I have a really good faculty in my music department, which do not understand what I'm doing, but at least they support me and have respect for what I'm doing. It is, I wish I had something better to say, but you really have to find a space that is going to support you and support the work that you do. I'd say Columbia is 95% there. I've had many instances, however, of people that don't want me there. And they don't want me in a PhD. I mean, child, I can tell you some stories. I can tell you some stories that will blow your mind in terms of people who think I'm there to clean the toilets, I'm there to clean the washrooms. I had a guy that I had to tell 5 times that I wasn't working at the daycare center at Columbia. I was actually a PhD student. You have people that, because I'm older, they think that, you know, maybe I was in jail for the last 20 years and got out and I'm an affirmative action case, even though they don't have affirmative action on a graduate school level, much less a PhD level. I mean, there's all these things that people try and throw on you, but I'm very passionate about what I do. I believe in what I do. I believe in the music I'm focused on, and I believe in the benefits that it has for my community, and that's what keeps me going. You have to say, fuck all y'all. You really do, because unfortunately, higher education is not suited for Black people. It's not suited for people of color. It's not. So you have to make your own way there. And therapy, a lot of tears, a support system, you know, you've got to have it because you are going to have to fight if you are, especially if you're at, in graduate school and you're doing something outside of the box. It's possible, but I would recommend that anybody who's thinking of applying, you have to visit the school, you have to find that faculty, you have to make sure that it's the right thing for you, because you're going to be doing it for the next 5 to 7 years. So I wish I could be more positive. I mean, I love what I do, but I'm also glad that I went to school, back to school in my 40s. If I was 20 and doing this, I don't know where I would be. So I think that it's also about having the wherewithal and the determination to take on what you want to do. So, yeah, good luck.
I'm trying, thank you.
I think we had a question over here.
Hi, thank you. This is a question for the entire panel. One of the things that fascinates me the most about the punk movement or punk culture has been this anti-capitalist sentiment, or the sentiment of not selling out, of how do you create structures and underground networks that prevent you from selling out. And I want to know how alive is that sentiment in Black punk, or in Black punk communities, or in the communities that you are a part of, or how do you negotiate selling out or not selling out, but also having food on the table and eating and growing your company or your organization, and if that's something that you had to think about?
Honestly, that's a good fucking question. Cause we still go through that all the time, because we always want the community to be, you know, as you were saying earlier, to be accessible for everyone. So we don't want to like raise prices at punk shows, even though we could at this point. You know, we've been doing it for 4 years. It'd be easy for us to charge $15, $20 to go into, you know, some sort of punk show. But I think I feel like it's more like a mindset. And as we grow bigger and as we make more money, it's really about making sure that we keep everything accessible as far as our monthly shows, as well as being more community minded. You know, we're always encourage people to help out their communities in general from like the ground up, you know, whether it's like Mad Houses or some sort of organization like that we have in Atlanta. But that's really difficult to do. Because eventually you just have to make money. You have to pay the people who are involved, you have to pay the bands, you have to pay the venue, you have to pay yourself eventually. But yeah, that's definitely my take on it.
Finally in my wheelhouse. That's been a question I ask myself every year, and now that we're passing our third year, it's definitely a question I keep asking myself. When the two other people who ran it with me that came on this last year, thank you so much, Lila and Layla, they said, "What are you doing for yourself?" Because I was so tapped out. First year, I used my money. Second years, I used my money. I'm a full-time student, and I worked like 4 jobs each year, and I had finals during the same time, and all my money went towards it. And I always be like, hey, crowdfund. I'd be like a very whispery crowdfund, like, just so you know, we need some money to pay the bands. You know, like I'd just be like really, but I did, because I was like embarrassed to ask for funding because it was my idea to bring these like people together. And then I kind of like was like, wait, but the reactions I got after the first and second year, I was like, it's totally worth it to get a little bit of confidence to do it. But the number one thing I realized is to take care of yourself. Whether it is therapy or just to like the thing is your therapy, you have to take care of yourself. I lose myself every single year, but this year I didn't, and it was incredible. I obviously have to take some time for myself after like 2 weeks of solitude, because I don't want to hear any voice or any punk music for like 2 weeks. I just need to relax. No more just someone starting the drums to test it out. I don't want to hear anything. But I look at the pictures of these people, and it makes me go like, this is necessary. But to keep that necessary feeling, I have to stay true to it. And so I ask the people locally, what do y'all like? I say, hey, you went to this Filipino music festival, California, how was it? Does anyone you like thought was really cool? Even if I don't like think it's odd, like I don't think it's like the best thing I've ever heard in my whole life, I'm like, the community wants that. The community needs that. What can I do to make this come here? How much money do y'all need to get here? Do you need bands? Do you need shows on your way here? I treat the bands like I'm trying to treat family visit for a family reunion. I'm just like, what do you need to succeed? And you're taking time off of your daily life. I am too. What makes it easy for you to be here to help this? And they're always like, no, don't worry about it. I'm like, I will worry about it because you're our family now, that you're in the show. And I always believe in take what you need. Do not ask for $1,700 if you don't need it because you just want to be like, we could put a bouncy house in the back. Like, I'm like, what does my community need? What do they need? How much money should I raise for the Black and Brown Workers Collective, the Trans Lifeline? What do they need to succeed? What do I need to succeed? Are there things coming up like for immigration lawyers locally that's like time sensitive? Like, what do they need? But also, what gets these people here and what makes them feel like they've been taken care of? Like, we'll throw them a breakfast. You know, like that's kind of what makes it personal, makes the fest feel like it's staying true, because no offense, but like Afropunk lost a lot of that, and they lost a lot of support from that when they start suing people for Afropunk, the phrase Afropunk, like James Spooner was like, thank you for doing this, and then that's why it's a big deal, because we want to make sure that does not happen to us, because we are a family and we're a community, and when the day that we lose that feeling is the day that we sell out. And it's not always about finances. It's about, did they just come and play and leave? And you're like, oh, look at this band that played from all the way from like Japan. Big deal. It's like, no, were they family? Did they do what they needed to do? Do you feel like that they could talk to people at that fest? And that's always going to be the mission. So yeah, big rant over.
Loved it. I think we have time for one more question, and then we want to leave some time for mingling. Well, maybe we'll do 2. Okay, you go first, and then we'll get that one, and that'll be the end.
Hi. Hey. Less of a question, more of a note of gratification. Thank you for being here. I've never felt so seen and affirmed in my existence. Thanks. I joined like the underground scene in like 7th grade at like the tender age of 12. Yeah. And in South Jersey with a bunch of like hardcore, intense people who were always intense about music and intense about their music choices. But I never seen like a Black person. And I think I only met one Black person in the punk scene like recently this year when I moved to Philadelphia. I kind of abandoned it after, I wasn't presented and I didn't feel welcome. And this is just, I don't know, I'm like, wow, there's more people like me. So thank you for being here, thank you for speaking, and thank you for being yourselves.
Thanks to all of you for being here, by the way. I wish I could always be in this room. This is what I've been looking for a long time. And so I'm old, like we were talking about aging earlier. I feel like young people are getting it righter than people my age were, and I wish I could be here listening instead of running my mouth. With that in mind, I'll stop.
All right, I think we had one more question in the back.
Hi. Hearing you guys talk was so much fun. And I came here late, so I probably missed this question. Well, like, maybe you guys answered it earlier, but for the Black woman, I'm interested in, like, what was the struggle like, specifically trying to find people to go to shows with? Because I do go to shows alone most of the time, and, like, some of the stuff you're saying was, like, the things that, or particularly you in the middle, like, that was the things that were going on in the back of my mind, like, I don't want to go to this show and get beat up, or I don't want to go to this show and feel like I don't belong. So, like, I'm just like, I don't know, maybe I should, like, wear more shirts in front of Black women, but, like, I'm interested what the struggle like was for you guys particularly.
Well, for me it was, I would go, like, during the grunge era, I would go to shows with my best friend who hated metal, but she would just come with me because she was my best friend.
Nice.
It is hard. I would recommend that if you are not involved in any Facebook groups, there's about 5 or 6 kind of Black rock, Black metal, Black punk, Black alternative musician. There's a number of Facebook groups for like-minded people. And if you can, through those groups, kind of find people within your area and just say, hey, so-and-so's playing on Friday, is anyone going? I think that's the best way to do it. It's just through social, like, whether it's, I'm not on Instagram, but, like, if Tumblr or whatever, Twitter, if you can find any kind of community groups of Black men or women or communities of color that are focused on a specific genre in your area, I would reach out to them. It's really imperative that you find someone to go with, not just for your safety, but also for enjoyment. You want to be able to talk to people. But on the other hand, I've also met I used to be a concert photographer, and as a journalist covering shows, I met a lot of people just through working. But I think also if you do go to shows by yourself, you will always see another person who's by themselves too. So you can also strike up a conversation, talk to the bartenders, just talk to people while you're at shows. And if there's a specific club that everyone goes to in your area, then, like, eventually you will meet people. Like in New York at St. Vitus, so if you keep on going to St. Vitus, you're going to see the same people, and that's how you also build a community.
I have one thing to add on that note. I would say it takes practice to be able to test the temperature of a room you're walking into. And I think for my sister and I, because we were born and raised in predominantly white areas, this whole dynamic about walking into the room and being the only one, that's our whole life, every day, all the time, anywhere we go, from the grocery store to the post office to school, right? And so over time, we developed an ability to know when we walked into a space whether or not it was a welcoming space or if we were getting a negative sense of energy, like something bad might happen. So I would say it takes practice. And then the other thing is, I would recommend to also do your due diligence when you're looking at bands online, because a lot of bands have a natural following where it can be very unspoken. You can go to a show for a metalcore band and maybe 80% of the audience is people of color, and no one really knows why. There are no POC people who are members of that band, but for some reason, everyone is following them and everyone is there, versus other bands where you really might see some scarcity, and there's an energy there that you're picking up on why people might be less likely to attend their shows. So I would say, yeah, like doing proper research about what these bands are known for, and like if you can capture like any YouTube videos of things they've previously done, and then also trying to find friends or even my sister and I, we're really big on making friends with security guards.
Yeah.
If the security guard ain't your friend, you definitely aren't safe in that room.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So just making eye contact with them and chatting up them for a minute too. They'll keep an eye out for you, right? We've gone to many a show where the security guards and the bouncers are like, "You gonna hang out here tonight? Okay, we know exactly when you got here and exactly when you left and everywhere you went in this room."
I know, I'll jump on that too. A lot of the security guards are black, so, that's a thing. But, if you strike up a conversation with security guard, I had this one security guard, he was calling me Miss Long the entire time. "Miss Long, are you okay? Miss Long, did you know there's water at the bar?" It made everybody around me think, "Miss Long, who is this lady? She about to get in a limo outside the show?" Because when I left, he was like, "Did you have a good time, Miss Long?" I said, yes, I did. People were like, so I actually had some people from the show walk by like, "Bye." Snapping pictures. I don't know who this is, but it's somebody,
Yes.
so definitely.
Yeah, just to add on to what Christina said, yeah, in some ways you also have to do your research in terms of the fans, like who the bands are drawing out, because as I was talking to Will before, and sometimes it's not the band that is like overtly racist. Sometimes it's the audience that you have to worry about. Just a quick story. I was in Detroit, over 10 years ago, to see Down, Weed Eater, and the Melvins. And I thought, it's Detroit. There's going to be lots of black people in Detroit. Man, was I wrong. So the show the security guards were black. Everybody else was white. I was mystified because I thought this is Detroit. But what happened is that my friend and I were up at the front to see the Melvins, and then they were setting up for Down. And so we thought, okay, we're going to stay for Down too. And all of a sudden, all these middle-aged white dudes come to the pit, and as soon as Down starts playing, they rip off their T-shirts and start punching each other in the face.
Oh, wow.
That was their way of being in the
like
mosh
Detroit.
pit. I've never seen
Detroit.
anything like it to this day, and I was scared for my life. And then the Confederate flag started waving, and then the white pride T-shirts, people were coming to the front. So the whole kind of concert changed in an instant. So again, I love Weed Eater. They're one of my favorite bands, but you do also have to watch, as Christina was saying, find out who their target audience is, and especially if you're into black metal, not to generalize or stereotype about the whole genre, but there are some European black metal bands and some American ones too that you do have to watch out for because their fans are usually quite racist and anti-Semitic and homophobic and transphobic.
All right, one more.
Also, it gets a little complicated when you think about hardcore as well, because there is a pit, and it is people pushing, shoving, kick flips, all that kind of stuff. Everyone's really going at it and putting all their energy into this room, and you might feel uncomfortable. You might feel unsafe. You might feel like you're being targeted. Trust your feeling to know that something's not for you at that moment. Doesn't mean the whole scene's not for you. I have been targeted. I have not been targeted. I've had people grab onto my hair, and I've had a wig on and be like, well, that's gone. Or I've had someone pick it up hoo, and throw it, and I'm like, well, there she goes. Oh. She was a blend anyway. So it's kind of you have to but no, you don't have to be tough in every single moment. You don't have to be I can handle this. This is how everybody know that I am meant to be here. If you don't feel comfortable, especially if you're going alone, even with friends, know when to be what, I'm just gonna watch from the back or the side, or I'm gonna go home. People might be really drunk too. My partner's straight edge, and it's opened up my whole entire mind to what makes people uncomfortable with alcohol and substances at a show, and that can be a whole nother play into it. Someone could knock a whole beer on you, I'm fucking done, or you could just be it's too much weed in this room, and it's or people get a little aggressive. So it's having those networks is important, and a good way to do that as well, to get away from that, is to reach out to fest organizers who do these Black and Brown Fest, or to look through their friends groups and see creep them out and be this person looks really interesting, and see what shows they're going to as well, and be hey, and then comment on a picture and be hey, just following you, this band's really awesome. Do you know if they're playing anytime soon, or that? Try to be, it takes a little bit of social to be there and a little bit extroversion, and that's not easy. but just know your boundaries and know what you want to feel comfortable, you know? Explore that world, but know that like you don't have to be super in the front, you know? You choose to be there, and you will be there when you want to be there, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise, you know? But also don't like get your wig snatched in the front.
All right, you guys, now we're just gonna open up for about 5-10 minutes of mix and mingle, so you can come up and ask the panelists questions. Shameless plug, we do have Blkgrlswurld zine for sale if you want that. But go ahead, mix and mingle. Thank you so much for coming, you guys. Thank you to our panelists.